Starting with the oral cavity, the digestive system leads into the pharynx, esophagus, and stomach. From the stomach, the three parts of the small intestine are shown in red, and the various parts of the large intestine are shown in blue. Digestive processes, including ingestion, break down both mechanical via chewing and churning segmentation and chemical using enzymatic action. Propulsion moves things along. Absorption primarily takes place at the level of the small intestine, and defecation will eliminate wastes. Histology of the GI tract from the lumen out starts with the mucosa lined by epithelium supported by CTP, including MALT, which stands for mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Thin layer of smooth muscle, the muscularis mucosa, is also part of that innermost layer. Submucosa is primarily CTP and also contains portion of the ENS, which stands for enteric nervous system, specifically the submucosal nerve plexus. Deep to the submucosa would be a layer of muscle tissue. Most of it is in the form of smooth muscles, muscularis externa, including a circular layer when, if exaggerated, forms dividing sphincters. Longitudinal layer is on the outside of the circular. Finally, the serosa would be simply visceral peritoneum. Important to note that another portion of the ENS is situated within the muscularis externa as a myenteric nerve plexus. Most of the GI tract is supported by double layers of peritoneum known as mesenteries. Salivary glands include the largest pair of the parotids. Also, smaller ones are located deep to the tongue and the mandible, respectively, known as sublingual and submandibular salivary glands. Within the tongue, you could see the posterior lingual tonsil, followed by the epiglottis. Various bumps on the tongue are known as papillae. Filiform for gripping purposes, fungiform and valate also contain taste buds. The esophagus from superior to inferior starts at the upper esophageal sphincter. Then the esophagus pierces the diaphragm through the esophageal hiatus and finally ends at the gastroesophageal junction with the lower esophageal or cardiac sphincter. The esophagus is lined by non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. The muscularis switches from skeletal, upper third, 50-50 of skeletal and smooth muscles in the middle third, and finally the inferior third of the esophagus contains purely smooth muscle within the tunica muscularis or muscularis externa. The exterior portions of the stomach include the domed fundus, followed by the body cardia right around the cardiac sphincter, eventually leading into pyloric region, which ends at the pyloric sphincter. The lesser and greater curvatures support the lesser and greater omentum, respectively. This slide, where the greater omentum has been cut, does show the extension of the lesser omentum from the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver. Internally, or some of the histological aspects of the stomach, include the three parts of the muscularis externa. In addition to circular and longitudinal layer, it has an innermost oblique layer. Gastric glands include parietal cells secreting hydrochloric acid intrinsic factor for the absorption of vitamin B12, mucous neck cells which secrete quite a basic or alkaline mucus zymogenic cells which transform pepsinogen, or they form pepsinogen which transforms into the protein breakdown enzyme known as pepsin. Enteroendocrine cells secrete hormones. Undifferentiated cells lead to the production of all of the cells that we have just mentioned. As far as the small intestine is concerned, three parts: duodenum, jejunum, mostly on the left side, and the ileum, which leads into the large intestine through the ileocecal valve. Since it's at the level of the small intestine where most of the absorption takes place, of note are several ways in which the small intestine has adaptations to increase absorption. Therefore, by surface area, we have the circular folds, the plicae circularis, microvilli, and at the apical surfaces of all the enterocytes, the main cells of the small intestine, you could see various microvilli, again to increase surface area. The cells of the small intestine, again as mentioned before, enterocytes are the main ones. We also have numerous mucus-producing goblet cells, lysozyme-producing Paneth cells, enteroendocrine cells, and undifferentiated cells would be found pretty much everywhere throughout the small intestine. Right at the center of each villus, again, it's another adaptation to increase surface area. At the center of each villus, there will be blood capillaries for the absorption of carbohydrates and amino acids, and typically a single fat absorbing lacteal. Remember, lacteals are lymph capillaries. Liver and friends. Here we see the liver and produces bile that leads ultimately into the duodenum. Also draining into the duodenum would be the accessory pancreatic duct, which contributes in this context digestive enzymes. More digestive enzymes are secreted into the duodenum via the hepatopancreatic ampulla, which is essentially the joining of the main pancreatic duct with the bile duct. Large intestine starts at the ileocecal valve, leading into the blindly ending cecum, extending from which is the appendix or the vermiform appendix. On the right side, it leads into the ascending colon, where it makes a right-hand turn as the right colic or hepatic flexure, then going into the transverse colon, left-hand turn as the left colic or splenic flexure, leading into the descending sigmoid colons, rectum, and the anal canal. Additional external structures visible on the large intestine would be the ribbon-like tinea coli, essentially strips of longitudinal muscle, which then will pucker up the exterior wall into bumps known as haustra. Finally, little tags of fat, and including some mesenteric type structures, would be the little epiploic appendages. Histology of the large intestine is much more simple. The main cells are colonocytes, simply the simple columnar epithelium, which lines this part of the GI tract. Again, numerous goblet cells, and there's also, of course, the muscularis mucosa. Liver consists of 4 lobes. The largest is the right lobe, smaller left lobe, and visualized posteriorly would be the caudate and the quadrate lobe. The doorway into the liver, known as the porta hepatis, will be the site of the entrance and exit of structures, notably the hepatic portal vein, coming in through that portal, hepatic artery, and leading out from the liver would be the common hepatic duct. The gallbladder has a single duct known as a cystic duct. It is a two-way duct which serves to receive bile, which is produced by the liver, and then to eject bile from that cystic duct ultimately into the duodenum. Histological structure of the liver would be via the classic liver lobules. These are hexagonal or 5 or 6-sided geometrical structures. At the corner of each would be found a portal triad, which includes a hepatic portal venial, hepatic arterial, both of which drain their content into specialized large leaky capillaries of the liver known as sinusoids. Ultimately, this combined blood flow will then drain into a central vein. From the central veins, all the blood accumulates and leaves the liver, not through the portal, but superiorly through the typically two hepatic veins, which then drain into the inferior vena cava. Bile ducts, the third components of the portal triads, will receive bile as it's produced by the hepatocytes, the primary and the main cells of the liver, and ultimately this bile is directed to the gallbladder for storage. And then finally, as it's concentrated in the gallbladder, it is ejected or secreted, released into the duodenum as the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Another accessory digestive gland is the double gland known as the pancreas, which means all flesh. Most of the pancreas would be of exocrine function. In other words, the acinar cells that produce and secrete digestive enzymes into a system of ducts, hence exocrine, and this would be the digestive contribution of the pancreas via the acinar cells, which as exocrine glands direct up to 22 to 23 various digestive enzymes, ultimately into the duodenum via two methods: the smaller accessory pancreatic duct and the larger main pancreatic duct, which, as you recall, will join the bile duct to enter as the hepatopancreatic ampulla. The endocrine or hormone producing portion of the pancreas includes little islets of Langerhans or pancreatic islets. Here there are at least three different recognized cells. The alpha cells secrete glucagon, the beta cells secrete insulin, and finally there are delta cells that secrete another hormone known as somatostatin.